Have you lowered your Mustang and yet you still have a bumpy ride? You probably forgot to trim your bump stops. So we're gonna show you how to trim them on a MagneRide vehicle and a non-MagneRide vehicle to make sure your Mustang is riding properly. So the factory bump stops are a critical part of the suspension. Almost think of it as another spring rate, meaning it prevents the suspension from crashing. When you go over harsh bumps, maybe you're out there racing, a pothole, you live up north, it doesn't allow the suspension to crash. It's foam bump stops, foam bumpers located in here that are gonna prevent the shock or the strut from bottoming out, prevent suspension parts like your camber arm from hitting the chassis. So it's a real critical part. The problem is when you lower a vehicle, whether it be 1 inch, a ½ inch, you're limiting the travel of your rear shock or your front strut. So you're going to need to trim the bump stops by the amount that the car is lowered. We're on dual rates, so you're looking at a ½ to 3/4 of an inch lowering. That's how much you have to take off the bump stop. The other thing to keep in mind, if you have an older vehicle, these bump stops are made of a foam type material, which means they deteriorate. I just did shocks on the back of my wife's Fusion. There was like nothing left. So a new set of bump stops had to be put on. And now one of the biggest reasons why it's important to have factory bump stops is because of all the delicate internals inside this rear shock assembly. It's a MagneRide setup. It's changing valving depending on your driving modes, and it is super important not to have it bottomed out. So like I said, even for an older car, it's super important to make sure you replace them and you've got a fresh set of bump stops on there to prevent any damage down the road. Now, if you're racing, if you're a little bit more hardcore, we offer urethane bump stops. They're a little bit more aggressive. It's more of a hardcore thing. But if your car's 4, 5, 6 years old, check it out on our website. We've got replacement bump stops for your application. Now, what we can do here is we're going to show you how to trim the bump stop. There's 2 methods for trimming your bump stop on a MagneRide vehicle, which our dark horse is. Those are going to be the most complicated. If you have a non-MagneRide car, it is super simple. You're going to remove your upper strut mount, pull it off, slide your bump stops off with your dust cover, trim the bump stops, put it all back together, you're golden. The problem with MagneRide is you have this wire harness coming out of the top of your rear shock, which is controlling the valving of that rear dampener. So it's not just so easy to remove that. So we're gonna show you 2 different ways on a MagneRide vehicle how to trim your bump stops. The easier method will be to start by removing the 2 upper shock mount bolts. Then pull the dust cover down, then push the bump stop down until it's released. Get it towards the bottom, then make a small slit in the bottom of the dust cover. Working your way, rolling it up until you have enough room to cut the bump stop. You may need to cut more to make some room. Use a razor to cut the foam evenly. Make sure to be careful around the shock shaft as you do not want to cut it or nick it. You will then need to cut vertically to remove the excess from the assembly. Once you get it most of the way cut, you can tear the part of the bump stop off. Roll the dust cover back down and tighten the upper mounts. Once again, this method is not recommended. This is just one of the ways you can do it. So as you just saw, we wrapped up with the simplest method for how to trim those bump stops. Now, it might not be for everyone, but it's something simple, it works. I would go ahead and put a piece of Gorilla Tape or something on this, maybe wrap it around it to keep some of those dust and particles out of there. But keep in mind, your MagneRide suspension you paid a premium for. You don't want to lower your car, have an issue, maybe have a faulty damper, and have to go back to Ford and them say, hey, look at all this dust you were letting in there. We're not warranting your rear shocks, and you're out a couple $1,000s. So while it's simple, it's the easiest way to do it. I do say, Proceed with caution because you never know what might happen. But if you're like me and you want to do it the right way, we'll show you how to do that next. So you're going to want to remove this from its actual assembly. You come underneath here, pull down, undone. Bends back up. Now, to remove the two, do the same thing. Come in here, lift up, pull apart. Now, we have a decision to make. Okay, that is much bigger. So we're gonna wanna take apart that clip. If you look closely, the straps are gonna come through the top and underneath. So you kind of wanna push down on this, get that exposed, and open it up. There we go. See it released. Same for the back as well. Push in. Open up like a clam. And that's going to allow us to get it through that top cover. You can see it won't fit. So you can either de-pin this, which is a pain, or we got a pretty big grommet on this. And there is room, if you look to the top side here, which is actually this side. So we're just gonna take a razor blade and make a little V in this. It starts small. But if this was my dark horse, this is definitely the method I'd use. Remember, you can't put back this plastic, so you want to be careful not to cut the wires. Although another way to do it would be to simply cut the wires, splice them back together, heat shrink, solder them, no clamps, no butt connectors. But to do it like that, ooh-wee, just a little bit more. Let's unbolt this. All right. Now we should be able to access, this will go through your Steeda strut nut socket, designed exclusively for the Dark Horse. Of course, we got the wrong size. With the shock mount now loose, you can pick this whole assembly up. Feel for that dust boot or the bump stop and pull it down. And now it'll give you enough room to be able to trim off that bottom portion. When you're done, simply press it up as high as it'll go. And put back together the assembly. I'd rather cut a little bit bigger with opening up top here, especially when you got a big oversized grommet, than slit the bottom here where you get dust and debris in on your actual shock shaft. So we'll see if this comes out as easy as it went in. All right, as you saw, this is definitely the most time-consuming way, but it's more of the correct way to do it. And if you end up cutting this hole up here a little bit too big, a couple dabs of adhesive silicone will do the trick to make sure no debris get in there. And then if you were to break this clip here, a simple zip tie would hold this together, but that's gonna prevent any unwanted dust or debris getting in there, leaving your dust boot intact in one piece. And you get a good idea of how much you trim off this bump stop, because it is super important to make sure you do this the right way. And even for the street guys, you're driving around, you have a lowered Mustang, you might have some extra weight in it, maybe you got some people in the back, a loaded trunk up, you went to Home Depot, you don't want to ride on the bump stops. It gives the car a nervous feel and gives you unpredictable suspension characteristics. We've worked our way up to the front of the car, pulled off the front wheel. There's no bump stops. There's no bump stops on the front of a MagneRide Mustang. Now, why is that? Traditionally, you're gonna have a foam bump stop up front. You're gonna have to trim that as well. Well, with the MagneRide suspension, these front struts, they are continuously changing the valving up to 1,000 times per second. They're monitoring what's going on. So, what they're able to do, because of the much larger strut body compared to the rear back shock, it's able to prevent the front strut from going into full compression. So no need for any mechanical bump stops via rubber or foam. In the front, it's completely handled by the MagneRide controller. Now, if you do not have a MagneRide car, so you don't have a dark horse, what you would have to do is disassemble the front of the strut, remove this dust cover, and simply trim the bump stop in the same amount you lowered your car. So if it's on dual rates, you're looking at 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. If you're on progressives, you're looking at probably about 1 inch you're gonna remove from your factory bump stop to maintain the proper travel and make sure you're not riding on the bump stops. Well, as you saw, it's a little more complicated with the MagneRide, but you do not have to worry about the front. So keep in mind, if you plan on lowering your vehicle, or if it's already been lowered, we do offer pre-cut bump stops so that you don't have to trim your factory ones, or if you're more of a hardcore enthusiast, we do offer urethane bump stops as well that are adjustable at Steeda.com. So hit like, follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and remember, Steeda, where speed matters.